Nicolas Cage walked out onto the stage with his usual eccentric stride, his coat flaring a bit too dramatically as the audience erupted in cheers, but his face looked oddly serious as he shook Conan O'Brien's hand and sat down, the tall redhead smiling nervously, sensing a strange energy coming from his guest. Nicolas Cage, everybody. Nicolas, welcome back. It's always unpredictable when you're here, Conan joked lightly, trying to ease the moment, but Cage leaned forward, glaring at him with that familiar wild-eyed intensity, and said flatly into the mic, "You know what, Conan? No pleasantries, no fake smiles. Fuck you, Conan." The audience half gasped, half laughed, thinking it was a bit, and Conan's smile froze as he looked at Cage, unsure if it was scripted. Okay, that's a hell of a way to start. I usually like to warm up a little before I'm verbally assaulted," he quipped, but Cage didn't laugh. He sat upright, his voice steady but biting. "I watched some of your monologues. I heard the way you mock people, mock me. Mock actors who put their soul on the line. And I came here tonight to tell you I'm not a punchline." The room went tense, the audience unsure whether to clap or stay silent, and Conan, ever the professional, leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "Nick, buddy, if you're talking about the little joke I made last month, you know, about you buying a dinosaur skull and then losing it, come on, that's funny, you can't expect me not to bring that up." Cage's face hardened. "It wasn't funny to me, it wasn't funny to my family. It's not funny that people think I'm some kind of bizarre caricature instead of a man who's been working his ass off in cinema for decades." And Conan quickly tried to keep the show flowing, turning slightly to the audience. "Okay, so you're upset about the dinosaur skull joke, I get it, but Nicolas Cage being upset about dinosaur skulls is, ironically, the most Nicolas Cage thing possible." The audience laughed nervously, but Cage slammed his hand on the armrest. "I'm not here to be your circus act, Conan. I came because your producers begged me, because they said you'd actually let me talk about my work, about my stories, but instead I walk out here and you treat me like a cartoon character." Conan, trying to diffuse, smiled awkwardly. "Nick, you've got to admit though, you do some pretty wild things, and that's why people love you, because you embrace the chaos." Cage's eyes lit up. "Chaos? You think I embrace chaos? Let me tell you a story, Conan. Let me tell you about the time I was in New Orleans shooting a film, and I lived in a house that was supposedly haunted, and I stayed there alone, because I wanted to understand what it meant to really be in fear, to feel the presence of something beyond comprehension. That's not chaos, that's commitment, that's art, and you sit there behind your desk and reduce it to a cheap laugh." The audience listened more intently now, drawn into the raw energy of Cage's words, and Conan leaned forward, deciding to meet him halfway. "Okay, that's actually fascinating. Nick, you stayed in a haunted house on purpose for a role? I gotta admit that's hardcore," but Cage shook his head. "Don't patronize me, Conan. Don't pat me on the back like some crazy uncle you only half believe. I want to be heard." Conan sighed, rubbing his temple. "Nick, look, I get it, you feel misunderstood, but you gotta understand me too. I'm running a comedy show here. People tune in for laughs, for weirdness, not for seances and haunted house journals." And Cage smirked bitterly. "That's your problem, Conan. You don't think audiences can handle depth. You don't think they can sit with truth unless it's packaged in sarcasm and irony. But I believe they can. I believe people want real stories, not just punchlines." And suddenly he leaned closer, almost whispering but still picked up by the mic. "You mock what you don't understand, and you don't understand me." Conan paused, his expression more serious now, the smile slipping. "Nick, I don't think anyone fully understands you, and maybe that's the beauty of it. Maybe you're too big, too strange, too passionate for anyone to put in a neat little box. But I'm not your enemy, I don't hate you, I admire you, even if I make fun of you sometimes." Cage studied him for a long second, his expression unreadable, then leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. "Maybe, but I didn't come here to be admired. I came here to confront you, to confront the way late-night TV feeds on spectacle." And Conan looked straight into the camera. "Well, folks, you wanted unpredictable television. Tonight we're giving you Nicolas Cage uncaged." The crowd laughed and clapped. But the tension in the room hadn't fully broken. Cage half smiled. "You're clever, Conan, but cleverness won't save you from truth." And Conan, always with a comeback, replied, "And truth won't save you from me making a joke about your haunted house obsession in about 2 minutes." Cage tilted his head, his voice lowering. "Try me," and the audience buzzed, sensing something electric and unresolved, as the first part of their volatile exchange left the studio hanging between discomfort and fascination. Conan leaned back in his chair, still wearing that crooked half-smile he used when things on the show got uncomfortably real, and said, "Nick, you're daring me right now, but you have to admit, haunted houses, dinosaur skulls, buying castles in Europe, that's not normal stuff. that's the kind of thing that begs for comedy. And Cage immediately shot back, his voice sharp but measured. What you call comedy? I call a cheap way to avoid listening. And what you call abnormal, I call living without fear. Have you ever lived without fear, Conan? Or do you just sit behind that desk hiding behind your wit? The audience gasped and then laughed nervously, unsure if this was about to explode or if Cage was still in some bizarre performance mode, and Conan leaned forward with his hand on the desk. Nick, you want to know if I've lived without fear? Try hosting a talk show for 20 years where every single guest could walk out, embarrass you, or in your case, tell you to fuck off in the first 30 seconds. That's fear, my friend, and I live with it every night. And the audience laughed and clapped, siding with Conan for the moment, but Cage's eyes narrowed. That's not fear, that's show business discomfort, that's nerves, that's ratings pressure, not the kind of fear I'm talking about. Fear of losing yourself, fear of becoming a parody of who you are, fear of being trapped in the public's perception forever. Conan raised an eyebrow. So you're afraid of becoming a meme? And the crowd burst into laughter. Cage stiffened, then laughed bitterly. A meme? Is that what I am to you, Conan? A face you can slap on a joke about losing my mind in some film? You think I scream in movies because I'm unhinged? No, I scream because life is unhinged, because art demands that you rip yourself open, and you reduce it to a punchline. Conan softened a little, sensing that underneath the fire there was something real. Nick, I get that, I honestly do, but you gotta see it from my side too. People love you because you're unpredictable, because you take risks that most actors wouldn't dare, and yeah, sometimes it looks insane from the outside, but that's why they watch, that's why they care. Cage looked at him for a long second, then nodded slowly. Maybe. But you don't care, Conan, you just care about the joke landing. And Conan leaned in, serious now. Nick, if I didn't care, I wouldn't even have you here. I'd just keep making dinosaur jokes without giving you a chance to respond. But you're here because I respect what you bring to the table, even if it scares the hell out of me. The audience clapped at that, sensing a fragile truce forming. But Cage wasn't done, his intensity flaring again. Respect is more than airtime, Conan. Respect is not twisting a man's life into a sketch. Respect is listening to the story about the haunted house and not turning it into a joke about Scooby-Doo. And Conan couldn't help himself, his grin cracking through. But come on, Nick. You staying in a haunted house really does sound like a Scooby-Doo episode. And the audience erupted, but Cage smirked, shaking his head. You can't help yourself, can you? Conan shrugged. I'm a comedian, Nick, that's the gig. If I didn't make the joke, I'd lose my job. And Cage leaned forward, pointing at him. And if I didn't push myself to the edge, I'd lose my soul. That's the difference between you and me. The room went quiet for a moment, the tension hanging in the air, but Conan raised his hands in mock surrender. Okay, fine, maybe you've got the soul, and I've got the jokes. Maybe that's why this is working tonight. Because the truth is, Nick, people at home aren't turning away right now, they're leaning in. And Cage finally let a small smile slip through. Maybe you're right. Maybe chaos and comedy can coexist. But his eyes still burned with something unresolved, and the audience could feel it, as if the night was heading toward a bigger explosion neither man had fully unleashed yet. Conan tapped his pencil on the desk, leaning back with that mix of amusement and tension he used whenever things on the show teetered between comedy and chaos, and said, Nick, I'll give you this. You've managed to make this one of the strangest and most compelling interviews I've ever done, and that's saying something. I once had Tom Cruise jump on my couch, but Cage shook his head, his voice steady. Strange isn't what I want to be remembered for, Conan. Passion is, truth is, and maybe even madness, but not as a joke, not as late-night fodder. And Conan smirked. Nick, my entire existence is late-night fodder. I make fun of myself every night. If I didn't, I'd collapse under the weight of being a 6'4" carrot with bad posture. The audience laughed, easing the room, but Cage didn't break. That's different, Conan, you control your narrative, I don't. I walk in here and you define me in 30 seconds. You spin me into something I don't recognize. And Conan leaned forward. Serious now, then tell me who you are, Nick. Tell me without the haunted houses and the dinosaur skulls. Tell me something no one can turn into a joke. The studio fell silent, the audience holding its breath, and Cage finally lowered his voice, almost vulnerable. When I was broke, when I had lost everything, I still kept making films. Not because I had to, not because the IRS was after me, but because acting was the only thing keeping me alive. It wasn't chaos, it was survival, it was the only way I could feel like myself. The room stayed quiet for a beat until a few claps started, growing into applause, and Conan nodded, a flicker of respect cutting through the comedic armor. That's powerful, Nick, and if I ever turned that into a joke, then yeah, fuck me, because that deserves more than a punchline. The audience cheered, and for a second it felt like the storm had settled, but Cage suddenly stood up pacing, his voice rising. You think it's over, Conan? You think we've made peace? No, because I still see it in your eyes, the urge to crack wise, the urge to keep this from getting too real. And Conan, standing too now, matched his energy. Nick, if I didn't crack wise, the people at home would think I'd been kidnapped, but maybe tonight. Maybe they needed this. Maybe they needed to see that behind the weirdness, behind the jokes, there's actually something raw here. And just as it felt like the tension had reached its peak, Cage stopped pacing, turned to Conan, and with that wild grin he sometimes broke into mid-performance, said loudly, "You know what, Conan? Fuck you, but also thank you." The crowd roared with laughter and applause. Conan threw his hands up, laughing too. "Ladies and gentlemen, Nicolas Cage has officially insulted me and thanked me in the same sentence. I think that's progress." And Cage finally sat back down, a smirk on his face. "Progress is messy, Conan, just like me." And Conan pointed at him with a grin. "And just like this interview." The audience cheering louder now, sensing that the chaos had turned into something strangely uplifting. But then, just as Conan was about to cut to commercial, Cage leaned in one last time. "By the way, that haunted house in New Orleans. I wasn't alone in it," and the studio went dead silent again, Conan blinking. "Wait, what?" And Cage stared him down. "Another presence was there, watching me. I never saw it, but I felt it. And tonight, Conan, when I sat across from you, I felt it again." The crowd gave a nervous laugh. Conan shook his head. "Okay, now I'm officially never inviting you to my house, Nick." The audience burst into laughter, the tension finally breaking. And Conan wrapped it with a grin. "Well, this has been terrifying, enlightening, and definitely the most I've ever been told to fuck off in one episode. Ladies and gentlemen, Nicolas Cage." The audience cheered wildly. Cage stood, shook Conan's hand with a sly smile, and the cameras faded to commercial, leaving viewers buzzing over the wild, unforgettable interview that had started with an insult and ended with applause.